Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're wading into, well, some pretty murky waters. We're going to be talking about public finance.
Specifically, a mechanism known as special accounts.
Exactly. And if you follow this topic at all, you've seen the words used to describe them. Words like untransparent, opaque, or my favorite,
The black box.
the black box of public spending. I mean, that language is just loaded with suspicion, right?
Yeah.
It immediately makes you think something is being hidden.
It does.
So we want to start right there with that language. We want you to really think about why that narrative, that story of darkness, has become the go-to explanation. Why is it so much easier to say it's hidden than it is to say it's just really, really complex?
And that label, darkness, it carries this immediate, almost intuitive suspicion. And it's an understandable reflex, really, when you're faced with something that feels incomprehensible.
Sure.
But for this deep dive into our sources, we need to reframe the mission from the get-go. Our goal here isn't to be auditors. We're not looking for intentional fraud or some grand conspiracy.
We're not trying to assign blame.
Not at all. Instead, we're here to look at the structural conditions that led to this perception in the first place. We're here to reread the architecture itself to see if that so-called darkness is really about malice or if it's something more systematic.
Something structural and maybe unintended.
Exactly.
That's a really crucial reframing.
Yeah.
So we're moving away from the person, the architect, and looking at the architecture itself. But, I mean, if we accept the premise that these things are called dark, that has to mean something is being hidden, doesn't it? Documents, information, something is being actively concealed.
This is where it gets really, really interesting, because the core thing we see in the source material is this huge paradox. What we observe is a situation where providing more information, releasing more data, more reports, actually seems to strengthen public distrust, not fix it.
Wait, hold on. That completely flies in the face of every single assumption we have about transparency. You release mountains of data and people trust you less.
That's what the sources suggest.
What on earth is going on? Is the data just bad? Is it contradictory?
It's not necessarily that it's contradictory, it's just overwhelming. The suspicion you see isn't fundamentally a result of concealment. The information is often there, but the suspicion grows because the system itself has exceeded what you might call an understandable size. It's simply too vast, too layered, too interconnected for any single person or even a small team to really grasp.
So if you give me one spreadsheet, I can check the numbers.
You might trust it, yes. But if I hand you 500 spreadsheets that all reference each other, that were made using 15 different legacy programs, and that span 40 years of decisions.
I'm not trusting the data anymore.
No. You're just confronted with your own inability to understand it. The knowledge itself almost paralyzes you.
That makes sense.
And this leaks to the key thesis from our material. The word darkness. It's not really an accusation. It's not a critique of malice. It's more like a provisional narrative.
A cognitive shortcut.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a shortcut we use to explain a structure that has just become impossible for us to grasp. When complexity goes beyond our cognitive bandwidth, our default reaction isn't, I need better tools for complex systems analysis.
It's somebody must be hiding something.
Precisely.
That completely reframes the challenge. The darkness is a symptom of something being impossible to understand, not necessarily a sign of bad intent. So if that's the symptom, let's talk about the structure. How did this monster get so big in the first place?
Well, the sources are very clear that this wasn't some grand design.
No one sat down and drew this up.
Not at all. This system is the slow, grinding result of historical accumulation, piece by piece, decade by decade. We can basically trace it in 3 stages.
Okay.
First, they were designed step by step to meet very specific and immediate policy goals. A ministry needed to fund new infrastructure or manage a specific type of debt, and so creating a special account was the logical, necessary tool for that one, single purpose.
So they started out as useful, targeted solutions, lean even.
Absolutely. But then you get to the second stage, they were just accumulated. Over decades, they were never abolished or repealed. Political inertia is an incredibly powerful force.
Once they exist, they're hard to get rid of.
They create constituencies, they hold long-term debt, and trying to wind them down becomes a political nightmare. Even if their original purpose is long gone, they become, in effect, zombie accounts.
Right.
And that brings us to the third point. They were operated long-term across all these different ministries, even as their own internal operating systems. their accounting systems, their institutional rules, let's call them.
Their department OS.
Their department operating systems, yes.
Yeah.
They became highly branched, totally independent. They stopped speaking a common language.
Like a huge company that just keeps acquiring smaller firms, but never, ever integrates their IT or accounting.
That's an excellent metaphor.
You end up with 40 different internal languages trying to talk to each other with translation software from 1998.
And the result of all that accumulation is the critical point. The structure isn't one that someone controls or dominates. It's a structure that, functionally, nobody can grasp in its entirety.
Wow.
So the key insight to take away here is this. An institution can start to behave in ways that are totally outside of human control, just through the quiet passage of time and accumulation. Even with a complete lack of bad intent, the system starts acting on its own.
A system that gains autonomy just through inertia and history.
Yeah.
That's a really big idea.
Yeah.
Okay. If we're moving past blaming people and we're talking about a system's autonomous behavior, we need a new word for that. What do we call a system that acts on its own because of its history?
The sources introduce a really powerful term for this. They call it a runaway structure.
A runaway structure.
And I want to be extremely precise here. It is so important to stress that this is an observational term. It's a diagnosis of how the system is functioning. It's not an evaluative term. It's not for judgment.
That's a vital distinction, because when you hear runaway, you immediately think someone malicious is at the wheel, driving it off a cliff.
Exactly. And we have to clearly separate runaway structure from, your typical conspiracy theory.
Right.
It does not mean intentional fraud. It does not mean there was some conspiratorial design. And crucially, it's not a tool to assign blame to any one person. Those are all human stories that, frankly, distract us from the real underlying structural problem.
So what does cause it then?
It's those three factors we just talked about: the historical accumulation, the tangled mess of interinstitutional dependency, and this is key, the failure to update the documentation. The explanation systems just didn't keep up with the complexity.
So the manual was for the 1975 version of the machine, but the machine itself was operating like it's 2025.
You've got it. So the darkness people perceive is really just pointing to the incomprehensibility itself. It's a structural failure, not a moral one. And this whole concept is meant to be a new lens, a new way of reading the system to get clarity instead of just condemnation.
Okay, so let's turn to action. We have this giant, self-perpetuating, impossible-to-grasp structure. If the complexity is that vast, what hope is there for reform? Can't a government just pass one big law to fix it all at once?
The sources are pretty clear that
Yeah.
no, it's not a problem you can solve with simple fixes or these kinds of bulk reforms.
Why not?
Because the accumulation happened over decades through all these nonlinear connections. You can't just slice one part off and expect the rest of the system to hold still. You might cut account X, but that account holds the debt for infrastructure that account Y relies on, which in turn manages pensions for Ministry Z. The knock-on effects are unpredictable.
It's like a giant, terrifying game of Jenga.
It is. We're moving into the realm of complex systems theory here, just to understand public finance.
Which makes sense, given the scale. So how do you even begin to map those kinds of dependencies?
You have to analyze it using what's called nonlinear analysis. It's a method that looks beyond simple cause and effect. It helps you understand the different speeds of different parts, recursive patterns, the effect of time, all those intricate dependency relationships.
It's more than just reading a budget from top to bottom.
Much more. And this is where, advanced computational tools come into the picture. You mentioned AI earlier.
I did. So what role does AI actually play here?
It's so important to manage expectations here. AI is absolutely not here to give you the solution. It's not going to tell politicians what to do or what the policy should be.
Okay, so it's not a magic answer box.
Not at all. It's true, technical role is to help unfold the overall structure that is simply too complex for any human team to hold in their heads at once. It's basically a visualization engine for complexity.
A super advanced tool for taking the thing apart.
Exactly. It helps decompose the complexity into chunks we can actually manage. And in doing that, it helps us visualize the touchable points.
Touchable points.
The conditions where a human intervention, maybe a small surgical change in the law, can actually trigger a predictable and hopefully beneficial change across the whole system. It helps you find the right levers to pull inside that overwhelming map.
This has really been a huge shift in perspective. We started this wondering why these accounts are called dark. We were thinking about judging behavior.
And we've moved to understanding structure.
Yeah. And I think the biggest insight we can offer you from this is that before labeling any system, governmental, financial, whatever, as dark or opaque, We should maybe first ask, what parts of the structure did we fail to read? What did we just not understand because the sheer scale of it all?
Special accounts are more than just a footnote in public finance. They're presented in our sources as a first case study for a much broader, much more modern problem.
Which is,
The pervasive issue of time-driven runaway institutions, systems that have outlived their designers and are now basically acting on their own because of history. And you can find them everywhere.
that idea that the quiet act of just understanding the structure is the first and most fundamental form of intervention, that is incredibly powerful. Decomposing the complexity to find those leverage points is where you have to start.
It's the beginning of regaining control.
So as you look at the complex systems that govern your life, the tax code, regulatory frameworks, maybe even the organizational chart at your own company, think about this idea of a runaway structure. What other societal systems might be running on their own right now, driven by decades of history and accumulation, and not by the malice of any one person? Mull that over. And thanks for joining us for The Deep Dive.